If somebody has chronic illness, it can create those disordered thoughts and then vice versa. I would say a very small percentage of the eating disorder can lead to a chronic health condition. However, it will definitely complicate it. So if
Mhm.
I'm not taking care of myself with food, with movement, with rest, it will definitely complicate my eating disorder. Somebody in a group I led a few years ago said, if I take care of myself with my eating disorder recovery, it won't make my illness go away, but it will be less difficult. And I really liked that because one isn't necessarily causative of the other, but if you take care of them, right,
Mhm.
it will help.
What's up, ladies? Welcome to the health class She Deserves, the show where we ditch outdated women's health myths and talk real bodies, real cycles, and real stories. I'm your host, Autumn Paone, and joining us today is Tamie Gangloff. Tamie is a therapist, author, and educator who has dedicated her career to filling a massive void in women's healthcare, the intersection of chronic illness, medical trauma, and eating disorders. With nearly 29 years of sobriety and her own lived experience navigating a scoliosis diagnosis and the complexities of chronic pain, Tamie understands firsthand what it's like when your body feels like the enemy. She is the author of Chronic Illness and Eating Disorders Assessment, Clinical Skills, and Lived Experiences, and she joins us to talk about how we can rebuild body trust and advocate for ourselves in a system that often misses the mark. Tamie, welcome to class.
Thank you so much. I love that intro.
Ah,
Thanks, Autumn.
thanks.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. I know that we're going to have like a really relevant conversation for a lot of people today. So,
Yes.
as I mentioned in the intro, you have your own struggles that led to building a business around this, writing your book. Talk to us about your journey and how those early medical experiences kind of shaped your view of body trust.
Yeah, so I always wonder how far back I should go. So I will start with just my diagnosis with scoliosis was when I was, gosh, I always get the age wrong, but somewhere around 10 when my sister was diagnosed. She's just a little bit older than me. And, at the time, I don't think it really impacted me until I had a curve progression and I needed a back brace. And a couple things happened. I heard the word deformity, which
Mhm.
by nature of what a curvature of the spine is, it is a deformity. I'd say, thank God, most clinicians don't use that term anymore to a patient, but that was like, whoa, it was hit me really hard. And also getting fitted for a back brace and having to learn to navigate life in a back brace, which is essentially a hard plastic shell that is hard to hide under clothes. These days it's so there's so much support and there are a lot of girls that share about their experiences. But back then, I didn't have that. I had my sister and we were kind of in it together, but it was a really emotional and difficult time. And when you hear the word deformity at that age, when your body image, your self image, and everything is starting to take shape, it just, those words meant ugly and gross and things that nobody wants to feel. So that's where that kind of body shame and those feelings started to come into play for me. And at the time, I unintentionally started to shrink myself. Back in those days, we didn't talk about eating disorders and disordered eating, but that's really, I think, one of the things that led to the perfect storm of my eating disorder at the time, along
Mhm.
with some relational and family things, of course. And then I struggled with alcoholism as well. As you mentioned, my May 5th will be 29 years, which is
Yes.
probably older than a lot of people listening. But if you get sober young, you get to live a life in your whole life in sobriety. And so my eating disorder coupled with depression and my chronic pain, I didn't really have pain from my scoliosis when I was younger. It wasn't until I got into my 20s that the struggle with pain and my first spine surgery happened. And so that was part of that story is my spine surgeon also noticed. nicely noticed my disordered relationship with food and really called me out in a compassionate way, that I had lost weight since surgery. I tried to argue him, but he said, "No, I know that you have," and drew me a little diagram of how our bones lose calcium. And I was so mad. And it was just the last piece of, okay, I need to get help for this. I'd already gotten sober and had, 4-ish years sober. And it was the last time I went back to treatment for my eating disorder at the time. And so, then throughout adulthood, right, if you have something chronic, your trust for your body shifts over time. We as a field, I'll talk about the eating disorder field, talk to people about intuitive eating and joyful movement, but it's not the same when you have a body that changes all the time, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes eating isn't joyful. Sometimes you don't get to eat the foods that you like. And a lot of times you're not able to do the movement that you like. So a lot of those things continue to change. And so that's what it was for me in my story. I call myself a retired athlete. I did a lot of really cool athletic things. Facebook reminded me that 4 years ago today, I did the Brooklyn Half Marathon. And
Wow.
so that was so awesome. I don't know that I'll be able to do something like that again. I have walked a half marathon also, so maybe I'll do that.
Mhm.
But I got to do a lot of really cool things, athletic wise.
Mhm.
And my body doesn't want to do them right now. So, it's kind of that ebb and flow. And then more recently, I think you and I talked about, I have an Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis. I had a surgery that we could talk more about
Mhm.
a little bit later on. Had a surgery back in December, and so I've been kind of in it with all the medical appointments, and all those things. That if you don't trust your body and you don't advocate for yourself, or you're not able to advocate for yourself, it's a really really tough cycle to be in. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that's my
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, thank you for sharing all that, and I think that's really, like, I guess something that maybe a lot of medical professionals don't think about because when you're going through med school and you're going through your training and stuff, like, it's all very clinical, and there's a big emphasis on, keeping the language, like, clinical and that kinda thing, which is, like, good in some respects, but like you said, using the word deformity to a patient can really shape how they're viewing their body, especially a patient that young. And I am not sure that's something that people think about necessarily because we kind of just get into like the autopilot of the day. And I can imagine that as a medical professional, you might just kind of forget that words can carry that weight. So I think that that's definitely
Absolutely.
really relatable for a lot of people as well. So you mentioned another thing I want to dive into a little bit more, eating disorder versus like disordered eating. What is the distinction there?
So honestly, I'll say this. I think a lot of people have a disordered relationship with food, right? Whether
Mhm.
they eat emotionally, somebody might, over focus on eating healthy, eating clean. When it becomes a disorder is when it's really impacting your life in a negative way on a daily basis. So, you know, um, for example, if I maybe am an over exerciser, but I'm going on vacation and I can't exercise for 3, 4, 5 days, or I can't do my normal workouts. If that's okay, then, okay. But it's when that causes maybe great distress, like, oh my gosh, I can't do my exercise. Or we start to maybe see some not necessarily health impacts. We do see that, but that might come later on. But you might start to withdraw. You might become more depressed, and using symptoms in an unhealthy way. So it really becomes a way of this is how I'm coping with my life and with my world. Whereas disordered eating patterns can happen with a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. So it's really been it come kind of crosses that threshold into really impacting your health and your life on a daily basis and not really
Mhm.
able to stop.
Yeah. So you've really dedicated your work to this specific gap in women's healthcare with that intersection of chronic illness and eating disorders and or disordered eating. So for someone who's maybe listening and never really considered this relationship before, what does that intersection look like?
So that's such a great question. And I have so many things I want to say. So, first of all, I keep saying this as a blanket statement, but I will keep saying it that anyone with a chronic illness of any kind has some type of, I'll say, complicated relationship with food and movement. Because, and yes, we want to be able to eat intuitively and do all the fun movement we want to do. But a lot of times we can't do that. So it's complicated. And so even if somebody doesn't have a history of an eating disorder, it could potentially lead to that. And vice versa, right? So if somebody has an autoimmune condition and all of a sudden they're being told they need to cut out certain foods, right? Anytime we restrict whole food groups, it does something to shift our thinking around food. I'll use myself as an example, and my dietitian might not like to hear this, but she said, "Don't, let's cut out eggs and cheese." And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. You know what I mean? Like, but somebody might try that and like, okay, I'm going to cut out all dairy. I'm going to cut out all eggs. Then maybe I'll cut out this thing. And so it can start a pattern of disordered eating. Um, and so, professional advice about food can be tricky also. So there's so much overlap. So if somebody has a chronic illness, it can create those disordered thoughts, and then vice versa. Um, Somebody with an eating disorder, I would say a very small percentage of the eating disorder can lead to a chronic health condition. However, it will definitely complicate it. So if
Mhm.
I'm not taking care of myself with food, with movement, with rest, it will definitely complicate my eating disorder. Somebody in a group I led a few years ago said, my if I take care of myself with my eating disorder recovery, it won't make my illness go away, but it will be less difficult. And I really liked that because,
Mhm.
one isn't necessarily causative of the other, but if you take care of them, right,
Mhm.
it will help.
And I think it's just like the interconnectedness of the body, like even though they aren't necessarily causing each other, they are all affecting everything. And I think in particular the nervous system is always going to be affected by these things. And that in itself can like disrupt your body's pain signals and your emotional regulation. Like it just all kind of snowballs. And so I think that
Yeah,
really is great. Like and it also, I think, it makes it less overwhelming of like, okay, I just need to focus on one thing at a time. If I focus on this, everything is going to continually get better and it will become easier. But I don't need to tackle all of this at once. I don't need to tackle all of the illness at once. Like I can just take it one step at a time. Yeah. I think it's
absolutely. And I think sometimes we do try to tackle it all at once because we feel like we have to.
hmm
But the point about the body mind connection is so important. And I think that's another thing that is not all the times, but sometimes missed in medicine. So a couple of things can happen. Either it'll be dismissed that it's just your anxiety, right? Or
hmm
it could be that the illness may have increased your anxiety, but then your anxiety may make it worse.
Yeah.
We do know that anxiety for sure will make pain worse, right? The more
hmm
anxious, the more tense, the more pain we have. So it's also complicated. Which
hmm
is why I would say, like, if you, especially if you're in the midst of, like, where I am now, in the midst of a little bit of my body's in a little bit of chaos right now, like, this is the time that you are using your skills that you've learned, but also maybe this is the time you go back to therapy or go to a support group because
hmm
we need to make sure we're taking care of our mind and our emotions and not just our body and vice versa.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. It's so true, and I know for me personally, before I got an endometriosis diagnosis, but, like, I was dealing with a lot of pain, and it was all very cyclical and predictable for me. I know that's not the case for everybody, but my pain was so like, to the day, I could pretty much figure out when I was gonna be, like, incapacitated, and it just created all this anticipatory anxiety as well, and I think that diet and exercise were and I didn't recognize it when I was in it, but in hindsight, I'm like, "Ooh, that was, like, a pretty disordered eating patterns, wasn't a healthy relationship with food," because I was trying to exert some sort of, like, control over my body, and it then led me to kinda blame myself if I, like, ate something I know I shouldn't have or, like, had a drink with my friends or something, and I knew I was inflamed then, when in reality, the pain was going to come from the endometriosis no matter what I ate. at the same time, there are certain things that we can like eat to support our bodies and movement that can
Mhm.
support our bodies and kind of make it easier to deal with. And like we're saying, it kind of becomes this sort of tangled web of like walking the line of an eating disorder. And I'm curious how you balance either with yourself or with clients that um, reality that food can be like a wonderful tool to help you manage illness, but at the same time, you don't want to fall down that slippery slope into unhealthy relationship with food.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll say for, for myself, I haven't had an eating disorder diagnosis for, I guess now close to 25 years. And, with my health things, it's always presented a challenge, more so the last 6 months or so with food because I love going out to eat, right? And I love, whatever I want. I love a lot of
Mhm,
different types of food. I have a sweet tooth. And so, my body hasn't liked those foods over the last, 6, 7 months. And so it's been frustrating. And sometimes it's a trade off. Like, I'm going to have that whatever, I'll just say piece of cake, or I'm gonna have that,
mhm,
the french fries and the stuff I enjoy, knowing that right now my body might not be happy with me. And so sometimes there's a trade-off. And, there's again in my field talk about like, mindful eating and intuitive eating, but when your body's going through something, we can't always eat intuitively, right? Like
mhm,
me having a large meal right now not, something my body likes, so I can eat 6, 7 times a day, really small meals. I had dinner with a coworker the other night, and I and again, being in my field, I was like, "It might look like I'm eating weird, and if it looks like it, I kind of am because I can't
mhm,
eat all of this right now. Like, I can eat, like, half now and half later." And there's all these rules that, I'm given by my medical team that are helping, but
mhm,
to the outside world could look a little disordered. To
mhm,
me, it just is that sometimes, eating is more mechanical and not necessarily intuitive, and that's okay. I just like to say that's okay because I think some people might think like, okay, there is something wrong with what I'm doing because I don't enjoy going out to eat right now because it's
mhm,
stressful. And I'd say the same for clients is just recognizing that it's okay if you're not doing what everyone else is doing. It's frustrating and it's okay if you're not able to eat the way you want to eat right now. That's a great goal to have. And sometimes we just need to say it kind of sucks that I can't eat the way I want to right now. It's just a matter of, being honest with yourself and also your doctor, dietitian, if you're working with one, with what you're doing with food to see is this us managing your chronic health condition or is this something that's turning into something disordered? People with, I'd say, you mentioned endometriosis, and I think those female health conditions, GI health conditions, autoimmune, they all kind of go together a lot of times, right? So I think those health conditions can really lead to having to do things with food that we don't necessarily want to. And then, like you said, it can lead to some disordered patterns. And then
mhm,
making sure we have an awareness of it so we can do something about it if needed.
mhm.
Complicated.
It's really complicated, and I feel like it's really individual also. Like there are certain things that certain people are going to be like more triggered by just because of their experiences, whether it's with like family or in the healthcare system or whatever, where if somebody tells them to like cut out a food group, there's no way that they can like safely do that because it just leads to very unhealthy habits. Whereas other people, might be able to do that, but when it comes to, like, restricting portion sizes, it's like, oh, it's much more triggering for them. Like, I just feel like it can be really tough to discern that, especially by yourself, and this kinda leads me to my next point. In our pre-chat, we talked about this idea of, like, being sick enough or, like, the sick enough mentality,
Mhm.
that kind of, like, prevents women from seeking the healthcare that they should probably be getting. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, sick enough is something that we've talked about in the eating disorder world for a long time. Like a lot of times somebody would say, my labs are okay, right? I'm not sick enough, or I'm not. And by the way, a very small percentage of people with eating disorders are a low body weight. So there's that sick enough, like I'm not underweight or, so I'm not sick enough. And so I think the same thing happens for someone with chronic illness. I mean, it's 70 to 80% is the statistic of people have non-apparent or invisible disabilities, right? So somebody might look at you and be like, well, Autumn looks fine, and so it's that, I don't look sick enough to need the help. And I think when doctors look at those of us that don't have an apparent disability and might look quote healthy to them, things get missed. And I think that's what happened with me this past year, and I'm sure that happens to a lot of people. So I don't look sick enough. Maybe if I have an assistive device and if I need to use one, that makes me look sicker. And so I think within the disability community, and then of course with medical providers, there's that. I mean, it comes from those appointments, right? And then
Mhm.
also friends and family might not understand. I always say smile and look pretty for the pictures because my I post a lot on social media for work things, and a lot of them are, I'm going to smile and curl my hair and put makeup on, but I
Mhm.
might not feel very good. And so outside looking in, people can make the assumption Tammy must be doing great. She looks like she's doing great, but on the inside, not so much. So, and then we can then turn that inward and gaslight ourselves, like I am okay, or
Mhm.
make ourselves feel bad, turn that, ableism internally, um,
Mhm.
and then use it against ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, we are kind of
Yeah.
trained almost to gaslight ourselves in a lot of situations, especially as women. And like you mentioned before, with just, it's anxiety and like you're fine and your labs are normal, so everything's normal and fine. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I am crazy then when you get told that enough times. And that can be
Yeah.
really damaging. You also mentioned the weight issue that I also want to dive into. We kind of just have this cultural idea that persists in an alarming amount in healthcare, that thin equals healthy and overweight equals unhealthy. And that is not always the case. And it leads to a lot of like delayed healthcare. How is that bias, the weight bias, really harming patients?
Oh my gosh, weight bias and weight stigma in medicine harms a lot of patients. I think for somebody that's maybe we just talked about like the thinner body, there's the assumption. I think the doctor's looking at you saying, like, I don't know what Autumn's talking about. She looks, she's a healthy weight. And a lot of doctors, and this leads into surgical conversations, look at patients that are in a higher body weight and require them to lose weight. There are some studies that show that when that happens, there's a higher risk for, infection and things. So, we're hoping that the medical field shifts a little bit and that there isn't the requirement to lose weight before like joint surgeries. But, when somebody hears that you have to lose X number of pounds before you can have this surgery, it's going to lead to some disordered behaviors because if I have a knee surgery, I'm certainly not maybe able to do the enough movement to lose some weight. And so it's forcing me to do something unhealthy to lose weight because the doctor told me that I had to.
Hmm.
And so it can definitely lead to a disorder. And also, every time, I don't know how many doctor's appointments you go to, but I go to a lot of them. First of all, I empower everybody listening. You do not have to get on the scale. You can say no. Um, for me, it's, typically lately I just say it's about the same as it was the last time I came. Like my
Hmm.
weight right now isn't really relevant to what's going on with me medically. So you don't have to get on the scale because I don't know, I don't think it's information that's really relevant. There's very few medical conditions it is. So that weight bias and weight stigma also might keep someone from even going to the doctor, right? Maybe you've been to the doctor a number of times and you always hear, you have to lose some weight. Even if your vitals, your labs, everything looks good, if your weight is above a certain number, a doctor might still recommend that. So then when you need to go, you might be like, I don't want to go. They're just going to tell me to lose weight anyway. So then
Hmm.
this, I don't know if resistance is the right word, that might be a little too strong, but kind of this resistance to even wanting to go to the doctor because you're just going to be stigmatized as having to lose weight. So,
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love what you said that you like don't have to step on the scale. And I've also heard other people say like you can face the other way and tell them beforehand, like, if you need to get my weight, I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me because it can be really triggering for me. And even recently had a friend tell me that I don't remember the exact comment, but when she went to the doctor and they weighed her and she's been like going to the gym and stuff and like trying to be healthy, but she was like, I don't care about my weight. Like, I'm really not. It's like just not something I'm interested in. The woman told me and it like wasn't really a big deal, but then she made some comment about like how I had lost weight and made it like this like positive sort of like benefit. And I think we often think of this of weight bias only going in one direction of like, oh, you're overweight, so you're unhealthy and that's what's causing all of your problems. And like that's a very big problem. But it goes in the other direction too, where they're like, oh, you're losing weight, you must be healthy. It's like that's not always the case.
Right.
Like,
Right. Maybe I'm losing weight because I'm not healthy.
mhm,
Right. And so praising somebody's weight loss is not, it's first of all, never helpful. So if your
mhm,
friends, family, somebody's losing weight, like, and if somebody brings it up to me, I usually say, how do you feel? But yeah, I think a doctor praising somebody for their weight loss instead of saying, huh, you've maybe lost, a lot of weight in a short period of time. Let's take a look at that. That might be something that's concerning instead of saying like, good job, right? That's the wrong
mhm,
message. It's not the message
mhm.
that somebody needs to hear.
Yeah. And I was just so alarmed that that was still happening. I was like, wait, what year is it? Like,
Yeah.
we're still doing that. That's crazy. So, let's talk a little bit more about what people can do if there's somebody listening and they're like, kind of realizing, okay, maybe I do have a bit of an unhealthy relationship with food, or like my chronic illness really affects the way that I'm able to eat or move, my relationship with my body. What advice do you have for that person who is like, I don't even know where to start with this? This is all brand new information to me.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you don't have to even know if you have a disordered relationship with food or your body. I mean, if it's definitely something that's causing you some concern, um, I can give you some resources. There's some good resources out there as far as clinicians that specialize in disordered eating. I think that most people with chronic health conditions need a dietitian, at least just to direct them kind of in the right way. If you do want a dietitian, find one that has, it should say on their website somewhere, health at every size or all foods fit, or even somebody that specializes in eating disorders. Because even if you don't have one, they have the mentality that's going to help you look at kind of a more holistic model and not necessarily cutting out foods and having to look at weight or calories. I don't care about weight and calories. And so if you haven't already focused on weight and calories, we don't want to bring attention to that. So maybe starting with a dietitian, a therapist, and also your primary care doctor if they are not somebody who is supportive in that way. Finding somebody finding another doctor that might be able to be more supportive. Um, I found a new PCP a few months ago just because mine retired. I feel like I bother her too much, but I do have a lot of questions.
Mhm,
So if you have a provider that doesn't want to answer every single question you have, you need a new one.
mhm,
Um, and I think that's hard for people to do because they feel like they're um, harming their doctor in some way or something like that, or it's a
mhm,
relationship, but you deserve somebody that's going to see you and hear you. There's also some good support groups. I can give you the links. ANAD is one of the nonprofits for eating disorders, and they have groups for people with eating disorders and chronic health conditions and long-term disabilities is what the group is called. And so you don't have to talk in those groups. So it could even be like, let me jump in a group and just listen. Because even if you don't have an eating disorder, you will likely hear something that you need to hear. Um, and therapy, right? Therapy. I started creating a resource list of therapists like me that work specifically with clients with chronic illnesses because it's often misunderstood, and honestly, that's why I wrote this book. I never was like, "Let me write this," I have to write this book, but it just was this conversation that wasn't happening, and a lot of clinicians would be like, "I don't know how to work with chronic illnesses," or "I don't have the same illness that you have, so I can't help you." and that's just not true. And so finding a clinician that does have experience working with somebody with a chronic illness, because it shouldn't be an afterthought in your,
Mhm.
if you're working on depression, it should be part of what you're working on in therapy. And that's honestly for me, for myself personally, that's the focus of my therapy right now, is what I'm going through with my chronic illness, because there's so much stress involved. There's sometimes there's, you can develop PTSD. If you don't know what it is, if you're listening, post traumatic stress disorder. So you can, that's where you might lead to, you might have trouble sleeping, higher anxiety, anxiety attacks. Maybe you don't want to go to the doctor because of it. So having somebody that can help you work through that's really important.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I that's a really important point of like your doctor should be willing to answer all of your questions,
Yeah.
every single one. And I know that our healthcare system is like really messed up and doctors are also like really constrained with how insurance works and the time limits that are placed on each appointment. Like they're not they don't necessarily want to like rush you out the door the way that it might
Mhm.
feel. But still at the end of the day, they need to be answering like all of your questions. And if they really can't in that moment, you should be scheduling some sort of phone call or something later. Like you need to get all your questions answered. And I think they bring up a really good point, especially as women, we kind of feel like, well, I'm bothering them. And I don't want to take up too much space. That's what it all comes back to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's it entirely. I mean, we grow up with this like keeping ourselves small. And so, right, I don't want to push too hard. I don't want to ask too many questions. And if you can have somebody go to an appointment with you, I have on my website, it's a free download. I don't have it right here with me, but it's
Mhm.
a pre-appointment, like medical appointment planning worksheet. So you can write down all your questions ahead of time so you have it in front of you, because sometimes when we go into those appointments, right, we have limited time. We get anxious and then we forget what we're going to ask. And then also, you could ask your doctor, is it okay if I record our appointment? So that way you can go back and listen. Like, I don't know, he said something about this and I can't remember. So you can go back and listen, and then maybe share it with a friend or family member to help you kind of decipher what's next. Because again, it's
Mhm.
really stressful and anxiety provoking. And also, I did this. So I had not a great experience with a doctor a little while ago, a couple months ago. And so when I had to make another specialist appointment, when they called me, I said, do you have a doctor that's maybe a more kind, compassionate patient doctor in this practice? I recently had a negative experience. And so they actually did say that, hey, this doctor, a lot of patients do say this about this particular doctor. So, and it was a better experience. So, you can also ask for that need to be met. And again, that, as you said, as women, we're kind of taught to not ask for those things. So,
Mhm.
it's okay to ask for those things, especially if you're feeling really vulnerable and you've been kind of in it, right? Like where you're appointment after appointment every week. It's
Yeah.
okay to ask for that, and it's important to ask for that.
For sure, because I mean, it's a shame that we even have to ask for it. You would hope that somebody who dedicated a crazy amount of money and years off their life to take care of people, you would think that they would have a natural sort of compassion.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's super important that you feel comfortable in that appointment, that you don't feel like you're being dismissed or disrespected. And I also like your advice for like having somebody with you. I love having my mom with me when I'm like first meeting with somebody or when I first met with my endometriosis specialist. She came with me because she, first of all, just thinks of things that I don't in the moment. And second of all, like you get kind of when you're the subject of the appointment, you just get a little bit like frazzled. And especially
yeah,
for something chronic that you've been dealing with for a really long time and you're really struggling and you've had bad experiences before, like it's easy to get real like frustrated or emotional in those moments, and having somebody else there that you trust and that you know for beyond a shadow of a doubt has your best interests at heart, that can be a really like calming and useful tool to have in your back pocket to sort of advocate for you when you don't feel like you are able to advocate for yourself. Yeah.
absolutely. My family lives a little further away, but my mom and sister are nurses. So a lot of times I'll text them like, hey, are there any other questions you think I should ask? And add them to my list. If somebody offers to go to an appointment with you, say yes, because part of the trauma part of having a chronic illness is that hyper independence, right? Like I got it all myself.
Yep.
I don't need any support. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to ask for too much. I'll share this. I had that specialist appointment that turned out to be really great. I met this other clinician for coffee, and I didn't know her very well, but she also had a chronic illness. And we met for coffee right around the corner from my doctor's appointment. And I said, "Oh, I have to go in a couple of minutes. I have to walk back over to the office." And she said, "I don't have a client till noon. Do you want me to go with you?" And I was like, and I keep saying that Tammy a few months ago would have been like, "No, I'm good. That's so nice of you to offer." But I was very emotional because it had been, I just had that recent bad experience, and I said yes. Um,
Mhm.
and she, even just knowing we talked on the way there, even though knowing she was just sitting in the waiting room for me, knowing I had support before and after, was really, really helpful. Just having
Mhm.
that person, and not feeling alone was
Yeah.
just wonderful.
Yeah, and I am so guilty of that hyper independence of like, yep, I don't wanna
Yeah.
burden anybody, I don't wanna be difficult, I've been dealing with this by myself for however many years, and I can continue to do so. But yeah, it makes a major difference, having somebody there. Um, we are getting, close to the end here, but I do wanna talk about your recent surgery a little bit and how that has kind of
Yeah.
impacted your journey.
Yeah, so I think I didn't have endometriosis, I had adenomyosis, which is similar-ish, right? So instead of
Mhm.
tumors being outside of, it's within the uterine wall, and so I think a lot of the symptoms are similar. So I had a hysterectomy in December. What my dietitian found out was that I had some labs that were not okay, and my doctor missed them or just maybe looked at me and said, Tammy looks good. And so it's been this kind of, as the one doctor said, blind spots in women's healthcare. That's just been kind of this, what is going on? So many question marks, another doctor's appointment, another question mark. And so it's been a big challenge for me to get the support that I need. I found some really good doctors through the process. I've also found out that, I don't wanna diss any type of doctor because there are some amazing ones out there, but I will say that I was getting vitamin IVs because I had deficiencies, but the doctor that was giving them to me didn't tell me that these are really high levels of these vitamins, and these are symptoms that you could experience if you have toxic levels of them.
Oh.
So, we were kind of trying to figure out what are all these neuropathy symptoms, what's going on, and it turns out that a couple of the B vitamins can cause that. Did you not know
Wow.
that? Right. So it was kind of like some doctors were saying I have POTS, and the cardiologist said I didn't, but I was having symptoms of it. So I think the complication of hysterectomy plus having Ehlers-Danlos, and I'd say a lot of autoimmune conditions, it's still a young field. Like I say, the eating disorder
Mhm.
field, when I got into recovery many years ago, kind of what the autoimmune field is like. A lot of doctors really just don't have answers. I also appreciate the doctors that told me I don't really have an answer for this, but I will help you continue to find the solution. So it's been a struggle the last few months. I feel like the iron infusion I had about a month and a half ago is finally starting to take effect. I have
Mhm.
more color in my skin, but also I have more energy. And so there still are some question marks, but I have a couple doctors in my corner now that are continuing the journey with me and testing new things. In women's healthcare, some surgeries, I think for like endometriosis or hysterectomies are considered routine. No surgery is really routine because all of our bodies are different. And, some women recover really well in a couple weeks, and some women might take 6 months like I did. There
Mhm.
might be more complications. And so I think for me, it would have been helpful to know that if my head's tilted down 30 degrees during a 2-hour surgery, I might end up in the ER with severe vertigo, right? So I think that For me, some of the frustration has been I've been doing so much research on my own conditions and trying to do my own differential diagnosis. It's been hard on me emotionally, right? It really
Mhm.
struggled. I really started to struggle more with my depression and anxiety, which is why I went back to therapy. So,
Mhm.
so it's been a ride. I will say that, as a person in recovery and somebody working in the mental health field, I did start to withdraw without knowing it. So if a friend reached out, I would respond, but I was waiting until I quote felt better. Here's the sick enough stuff, right? I was
Mhm.
waiting until I felt better to tell people how I was doing, and then I was like, "Oh, I don't feel better yet, so
Mhm.
I should still talk to my friends anyway." So that's kind of so there's all these blind spots in women's healthcare. It just is, I think there always has been blind spots in women's healthcare, and there's so much more. And as I've had these conversations with other women like you, it seems like it's just so common. So it's so important for us to talk about, because I'm sure there are women that are going to listen to this and say, like, yes, that happened to me too. Or
Mhm.
I got an ultrasound last week, and even the ultrasound tech was like, "Yeah." She's like, "It really took me like," she said, "after about a year after my hysterectomy, I felt good again." I was like, "Hopefully it won't be a year." And it was also validating to hear, okay, it is somewhat normal-ish to have a much longer recovery. And
Yeah.
if you have Ehlers-Danlos, your recovery time for surgery could be about 3 times longer. Nobody told me that.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so knowing that too gave me some hope. So I really, even with all of my knowledge, it really it was hard to keep my feet on the ground, right? And to stay focused and to stay positive. So I did a lot of things that were helpful. I got back to meditating. I love the Insight Timer app because I'm not good at doing it myself.
Same.
I
I love
love
that
it.
app.
Listen, for
It's so
anything,
good.
there's a SOS for anxiety if you're having a panic attack.
Yep.
By the way, the shift in your hormones post-op can cause a great increase in anxiety and all of those
Mhm.
things. So I didn't know that I could start having panic attacks, but I did. I'm not now, knock on wood, but it lasted for a while. And so to say that some of those things are normal, and then you can get through them, and to go back to basics, which um, doesn't mean you failed. It just means all the basics you learn in recovery from whatever you're recovering from, like
Yeah.
coloring books, and um, you
Mhm.
know taking a slow mindful walk, and if you can walk, doing some
Yeah.
type of movement that can help ground you. So I think changed me. I probably know in a lot of ways, and I probably won't know. Just like when my spine surgery changed me in a lot of ways, I probably won't know for some more time, and
Mhm.
what ways it did. But it definitely shifted my perspective on healthcare in general, and
Mhm.
also um, there was a doctor. I posted this at the Ehlers-Danlos conference at University of Virginia a few weeks ago. If you're interested, you can watch it free on YouTube, which I love that
Okay.
they did that. And
Cool.
he was talking about that it's an act of courage to walk into a doctor's office and try to trust them, especially
Mm.
for those of us that have something chronic. And so just know that, there are some doctors that really understand. And for you to hear, it is courageous, it is brave. And if you have chronic medical conditions, it's not really an option to just say, I'm not going to go anymore. Right.
Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
have to figure out a safe way to go. Um,
Yeah.
I wish every doctor was like that doctor. I love my EDS doctor. She's moving out of the country, which
Oh,
I'm very
no.
happy for her. I'm sad for me, but I'm happy for her. But to have a doctor that you can say like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I can be brave and go in and talk to this person." So that was a very long
Mhm.
answer of my current
No,
health journey. Yeah.
yeah, but you're right, and it makes such a world of difference having a doctor that you can trust and that you know is going to answer all of your questions, like you said, and, um, the anxiety thing was really interesting too, like, especially after an organ removal of some sort. I would just imagine your body probably is for a few months, like, "Holy shit, we're missing something," Like, it has to come into a new baseline of operating because it's not just like a surgery like for endometriosis, like I had, tissue removed that wasn't supposed to be there. But you when you have an entire organ removed, that is quote unquote supposed to be there, but can cause pain and all these symptoms. Like, I feel like it makes sense that your body would go into just this kind of state of like hypervigilance and anxiety and panic attacks and that kind of thing. And I don't think that's something that's talked about. And I'm very curious what the actual numbers would be for that, for women who kind of go through that. Um, because we kind of are discouraged from talking about those sorts of things. And if we've had our symptoms blamed on anxiety before, we're more reluctant to bring it up in a medical setting because a lot of times when you bring up anxiety, they're like, "Oh, that's why everything's happening." And you're like, "Well, no, it could be the other way around."
Exactly. I'm anxious because it happened. And you're right, your body, your body has memories, right? We know that our body,
Mhm,
right, the body keeps the score. Like your body has those memories, even if you don't have that memory of maybe being in the surgery, losing that organ, and the hypervigilance and the things that come along with it. So,
mhm,
um, yeah, the anxiety is real, and for your doctor to be able to acknowledge that this could potentially be there, those conversations don't typically happen as far as the mental health impacts of
yeah,
surgeries, and so.
yeah,
We would need a whole nother episode to talk about that, but there are a very few pre-surgical psychological assessments, and I think my surgeon was wonderful. And I think she does a lot of these surgeries. Like you said, she's a very busy doctor. She does a lot of these surgeries. They're quote routine. And so then it's kind of on to the next. And then you have
mhm,
a patient like me where it's like, if there's going to be a complication of some kind, I'm probably going to get it because that's just how my body is. So inform me, please, of
mhm,
those potential things because this is happening not because I'm anxious, but it is certainly making me anxious.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I also think it's a really relatable thing when you're talking about recovery time, like it just being very different for each individual patient. And I kind of wish they wouldn't put such rigid timelines on it because I was pretty much told after my, like, yeah, technically the same day, unless it was like really extensive, but I had stage one endo. And so it wasn't, um, anything like no like major organs were affected or anything, which I'm grateful for. But theoretically, I could stand, immediately after surgery and a little unsteady on my feet from the anesthesia, but they're like, "In 2 weeks, you're, like, good to go." And quite honestly, physically for me, in a few days, I was, like, ready to go in terms of, like, I could take a lap around the block, I could make myself food, I could get out of bed, minimal pain. Mentally, though, I was just completely out of it. I had a bone t deep exhaustion I'd never felt before in my life,
Mhm.
and it lasted way longer than 2 weeks. So I was like, I mean, I
Yeah.
could go back to work technically, but like, I feel like my brain's not working. So I don't really know if it's going to be useful for me to go back to work. So I think that's really like an important thing for people to
Yeah.
hear, especially if you've had surgery and you kind of had that feeling of like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I taking so long? Do I need to be concerned about something else? When in reality, it's like everybody's different. And when you have comorbidities like Ehlers-Danlos, especially, for surgeries. It's not something that's talked about enough, but that can cause some major delays in terms of like how speedy your recovery is. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that fatigue is no joke. I mean, that lasted a
Mhm.
very long time for me. And um, when people are like, "Oh, yeah, you're tired." I'm like, tired is a little different than that kind of fatigue when you're like, "I have melted into this chair and I just like cannot get up." So,
Yeah.
and just to honor your body and yeah, I think had I heard that, had I been told like, your recovery time, take that 4 to 6 weeks and times it by three, which my EDS doctor finally did because I reached out and I was like, I don't know what's happening to my body. I
Mhm.
probably would have panicked a little bit less had I
Yeah.
known some of these things are normal for what my body's recovery time is. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really amazing conversation. I do have one last question that I like to ask all of my guests at the end. If you could rewrite the health class curriculum that every woman deserves, what would your first lesson be?
Wow. That you have a voice, that you can take up space, and that your body is unique and your experience is going to be unique. And you deserve to be treated with the best care and compassion from your medical providers. And if you have difficulty using your voice, that's okay. We will teach you how to do that. And also, somebody can help you with it too. I think that understanding that, like, what I have to say, who I am, is really, really important. Um,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that would be a really empowering class for people. Because just, I mean, I guess everyone, but in particular, young girls were really not taught those skills in childhood, and that carries over into adulthood and makes itself known in healthcare, as we have clearly laid out in this conversation. So thank you so much for all of
Thank
your
you.
wisdom and expertise, and honesty. I will link your website, and your book below for everybody, and social media as well. Okay.
That medical appointment pre-planning medical
Mm,
sheet is just under resources on my website. And also if you, I'm really happy to answer any questions and give resources.
mhm.
So if somebody needs some resources and has some questions, like, please reach out. I'm really happy to offer support in that way. Yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much. This was a really great conversation. I'm excited for everybody to hear it. So
Yeah,
thank
me
you,
too. Thank
Tammy.
you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Class dismissed.